Hey, what's happening, everyone? Thanks for joining me today. Today's episode, I'm going to be trying to do a deep dive, somewhat of a deeper dive, into everything that's happening, what's going on in policing. There have been, over the last few weeks or so, there have been a tremendous, there's been over the last year, a couple of years, there's been a tremendous spike in the amount of police officers who have been killed in the line of duty. And so I'm going to touch on the topic of whether these attacks are targeted. Is it open season on the police over the last few years? I'll touch on it to some degree a little bit of why that may be, if it is true, and we'll show a few video clips of some recent body cam footage in relation to some of the shootings. But I also want to make sure that I pay some honor and respect to some of the officers that made the ultimate sacrifice over the last few weeks. But we're going to jump into this initial clip discussing the issue. Are these attacks truly targeted? Has there been an uptick? Let's check it out.
This morning about a deadly shooting in Bristol, Connecticut, where two veteran police officers were killed. The state's inspector general's office says over 80 rounds were fired by the gunman that night. And the IG's office also released this portion of police body cam footage showing the moment the surviving officer, who had been shot in the leg, managed to make his way around the house and back to a police car before firing the shot that ended the ambush. CNN's Josh Campbell has more on the rising number of police officers shot in the line of duty.
I'm shot and hit my partner, shot in the leg.
3 Philadelphia SWAT officers shot last week in the line of duty. So far, 2022 has been an especially violent and deadly year for law enforcement in America.
I'm outraged. I'm disgusted. I'm wondering where the level of outrage and upset is outside of the law enforcement community.
I think she makes a really good point. Now, I know that there are a lot of people out there who actually support law enforcement. But we're living in a society where the criminal, the offender, gets the vast majority of the love and appreciation and care, whereas the victim and the cop, who might have made a tremendous sacrifice or might have been severely injured or wounded, gets almost no thought. People hardly think about them. And it just shows the sad state of affairs, where we are as a society. And hopefully, by the grace of God, we're able to come out of it. I don't know.
Danielle Outlaw is Philadelphia's police commissioner.
And right now, things are wrong because the level of violence that we're seeing against our law enforcement officers is just beyond outrageous.
Across the country, there have been 252 officers shot in the line of duty through September of this year.
And those numbers have already gone up. Just look at that number. There have already been 252 officers shot in the line of duty. How often do you hear those figures? How often do you hear those numbers? Unless you're searching for this information, you won't find it.
Shot in the line of duty through September of this year, according to the National Fraternal Order of Police. 50 were killed. It's a continuation of a rising violent trend. According to the FOP, 44 law enforcement officers were killed by gunfire in the line of duty during the same time period last year, adding up to officers being fatally shot more often than once a week during that time. In El Monte, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, 2 officers were killed this summer as they responded to a call about a stabbing.
They were acting as the first line of defense for our community members when they were essentially ambushed.
In fact, there have been 63 ambush-style attacks on law enforcement through September of this year, according to the FOP. At least 93 officers were shot during those onslaughts. 24 died as a result. Wow. In Bristol, Connecticut last week, 3 officers were alleged.
I want to hover on those numbers a bit. Let me back up a bit. Let's just look at these numbers. I mean, honestly, this is nuts.
Community members when they were essentially ambushed.
In fact, there have been 63 ambush-style attacks on law enforcement through September.
63 through September. And that's not even counting the current October stats. I have some information I'm going to share with y'all that goes into a little more detail. I don't have every detail, but it talks about, it's more frequent, more current. It references the number of shootings and deaths by gunfire over the last couple of weeks. So the numbers that we're getting I'm sharing with you in some of these videos have already went up.
September of this year, according to the FOP. At least 93 officers were shot during those onslaughts. 24 died.
So 93 were shot during the 63 ambush-style attacks, where someone called with the intention of setting up an officer. Either they made a call, had the officer come to their home or somewhere, or they just attacked an officer who might have been doing something else.
Died as a result. In Bristol, Connecticut last week, 3 officers were allegedly ambushed and shot. Only 1 survived. The gunman may have lured them there by making a false 911 call, according to investigators.
Shots fired, shots fired.
Just what I'm talking about.
Send everyone. One down. Suspect down.
In 2021, data from the FBI showed the highest number of law enforcement officers were intentionally killed in the line of duty.
I want to reference this officer, how he managed to keep his cool. Shot in the leg. This is why I say training is so important. This officer had 2 other officers who went down during the shooting. He's shot in the leg, and he manages to take out the suspect with 1 shot, 1 clean shot. This is why training is absolutely vital, y'all. You have to be sharp. You have to stay proficient. You have to practice. It's boring. I know. I get it. It's tedious at times. There's so many other things you would much rather be doing. I totally understand. But the reality is solid training saves lives, period, and helps you respond in situations like that. If you train properly, then your rote memory, your motor skills, they'll kick in and they'll be able to help you, especially if you train at an optimal level where you allow your adrenaline to spike, maybe do some exercises in between shooting some rounds that can definitely help you be focused and become a better shot. And it's the best we can do to simulate stress. That maybe getting involved in some target shooting competitions, things like that. There are various ways you can improve your skills. But you cannot as officers, I'm retired, but you cannot as an officer allow your skills to wane. You just can't do it. There's too much at risk.
Since the September 11 terrorist attacks, 20 years earlier. The
Bring
data
back
mirror
that,
September 11 terrorist attack of duty since the September 11 terrorist attack. Highest number of law enforcement officers were intentionally killed in the line of duty since the September 11 terrorist attacks.
Goodness sake.
20 years earlier. The data mirror a rise in gun violence in many parts of the country in recent years, now rising to levels not seen since the mid-1990s.
And just as a side note, the mid-1990s, we're talking about during a time when crime was through the roof. Crime was through the roof, and we were dealing with so many issues, so much violence on the street. That's where the 94 crime bill came into effect. There was a lot going on out there. So many people take heat over the 94 crime bill, but I think oftentimes we forget the atmosphere that we were dealing with, the violence that was overwhelming many of our cities, our bigger cities, our inner city, the hood. A lot of Black communities, a lot of Hispanic communities were being decimated by the gang violence. The crack epidemic was real, y'all. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There's a lot of revisionist history going on when it comes down to everything that was happening. We have to be reminded of the world we were living in at that time. And we're seeing similar numbers as far as police officers being attacked, police officers being shot and killed. The numbers are similar to what we're dealing with today, are similar to those numbers back in the mid-90s. Just as let that sink in.
A teenage gunman killed 5 people in Raleigh, North Carolina last week. A responding police officer injured in the shooting. The increasing violence against police has law enforcement leaders around the country sounding the alarm.
3 of your officers have been shot. What's that like?
It's a pit in your stomach. These are folks that answered a call to serve. They want to give back. We sign up to do this understanding the risk, understanding the danger, but we did not sign up for these jobs to be martyrs. We just didn't.
Now, I've talked to law enforcement leaders who say that in addition to their concern for the safety of their own people, there's also a concern here over recruitment. Of course, the big question, will this wave of attacks that we've seen on police dissuade people from raising their hand and joining the force, possibly impacting public safety for years to come? Bianna?
Thanks to Josh.
I think we're already seeing the results of that in our society. We're already seeing what happens in the United States. What happens? Get rid of this here. We're already seeing what happens when the society turns against their police, makes them out to be worse than what they truly are. And that's exactly what we're dealing with. Those in power, especially those with a Marxist, socialist worldview, honestly, because I've been doing some research, and I don't want to completely go down this road right now. But I've been studying some and how the attack on law enforcement, in my opinion, has been completely intentional. Completely intentional. There are many who speak out about disrupting the government and things like that. Excuse me, y'all. Who speak about we need a complete overhaul with our government, with our nation. They're wanting to get rid of the Constitution. So the concept or the idea of, and then when you read some early Marxist literature and communist literature, there has been, throughout history, there's been an intentional attack on law enforcement because they represent law and order. And if you want chaos in a society, if you want a complete upheaval, you want people to be totally reliant and dependent on the government, then one of the smartest things or one of the best things you can do is to reach out and target law enforcement and make them out to be the enemy. Because once you don't have, 2020 was a prime example. During the lockdowns, when the only people that were allowed on the streets were protesters, and they were burning up buildings and attacking people and rioting and looting, causing over $2 billion in damage. As far as we know, around 24 people murdered, probably more. Lord knows how much damage we'll ultimately find out that they caused. People were trying to do whatever they could to protect themselves. They were crying out for the government to help them. And then when they saw that the government wasn't going to do anything, people went out and were trying to purchase guns so they could protect themselves. And then those that bought guns were made to be the bad guy. So you just have a culture of society that was just in total upheaval. And I'm surprised we managed to regain some footing. I think we were still in a very, very bad place as a nation. And apart from some radical transformation, the Lord intervening, personally, I think that things are only going to get worse. I think things will truly only get worse. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I don't think so. But I'd love to know what y'all are thinking. I'm not done. It's far from it. If you're watching me live, I'd love to know what you think. So comment in the chat, or if you're watching the recorded version of this, comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you think that the U.S. there's hope in the long term, or you think that we've come too far to turn back? I'd love to know your thoughts. But let me share some additional content with you. Like I referenced, there's been a lot going on as far as the officers who have been shot and killed on duty. Share an article with you. We'll share some additional footage as well. Hopefully you guys can see this here. I'll read it to make sure. At least 12 police officers shot, some killed in violent week across the U.S. And this is dated from the 14th, so 4 days ago. It was a violent week across the United States, notably for police officers. After at least 12 in law enforcement were shot in cities spanning coast to coast, leaving at least 5 of them dead in Connecticut, Mississippi, Nevada, and North Carolina. We're seeing violence against law enforcement skyrocketing, according to the National Fraternal Order of Police. And those guys have been doing a phenomenal job of tracking this stuff. Of the country's largest police union said Thursday, since Monday, at least 12 officers have been shot. This must stop, and I completely agree. A police officer in Mississippi was killed late Tuesday as she and other officers responded to a call. And if I'm not mistaken, her name was, forgive me here for not having that handy. Her name was, I think that was investigator Maisha Brianna Stewart. And I'll show her later on in today's video. But Maisha Brianna Stewart was the officer on October 11th who was shot and killed. And she and other officers responded to a call. Authorities said several other people were injured by gunfire. Miles away in Philadelphia, 3 officers were shot and wounded at a home early Wednesday when a SWAT team tried to arrest a man wanted on a homicide charge. I'm wondering what the details were on that. Was he let out by some extremely progressive DA? Who knows? In central Illinois, 2 police officers conducting a traffic stop were also shot and wounded early Wednesday by a driver who died after officers returned fire. On Wednesday night, 2 police officers were killed in Bristol, Connecticut, which is some of the footage I shared with you just a minute ago, after apparently being drawn into an ambush by an emergency call about possible domestic violence. A 3rd officer was shot and wounded. And these officers were Sergeant Dustin DeMonte, who's on the left, right here, left of your screen, and Officer Alex Hamzy. Also that night, a Florida sheriff deputy was saved by a bulletproof vest. Wear your gear, gentlemen, wear your gear. It's not foolproof. It won't protect you from everything, and we'll get into that here shortly. But it has saved many a life over the years. Hours later in Las Vegas, here in my hometown, on my home department, my former department, a veteran police officer patrolling an area that officials identified as a hot spot for crime died after being shot early Thursday during an exchange of gunfire with a man who was later arrested. And he worked what is known as South Central Area Command here in Vegas, and that's where I first started working when I left the graduated patrol academy and went through field training. And if it's anything like it was then, now it definitely was and is a hot spot. In Raleigh, North Carolina, an off-duty police officer was killed Thursday evening by a 15-year-old gunman. This was the active shooter in North Carolina. The teen killed 4 other people, ranging in age from 16 to their late 50s, and wounded 2 others. The off-duty officer, 29-year-old Gabriel Torres, had been on his way to work when he was shot when the shooting began. So sad. The violence in Raleigh was the 25th mass shooting in 2022, in which the victims were fatally shot, according to the Associated Press. A mass killing is defined as when 4 or more people are killed, including the perpetrator, or excluding the perpetrator. And there's a lot more information out there now on mass shootings. Typically, the media gets it wrong. There's some things that they report, and there's some that they don't. Joe Grimaldi, the FOP National Vice President, called the incidents this week in which officers were shot absolutely abhorrent and a stain on our society. As a profession, we are disgusted, exhausted, angry. Most of all, we are hurting, Grimaldi tweeted. Amen to that. There have been 252 officers shot in the line of duty as of September 30th, up 5% since the same time last year, according to an FOP report shared October 4th. Of those officers shot, 50 of them were killed. The The most officers shot in the line of duty at the time of the report had occurred in Texas, 24. Well, it's a pretty big state, so 24 were killed in Texas, followed by Arizona, 21, Kentucky, 16, California, 13, and North Carolina, 12. Reports. My goodness. Insane numbers, y'all. Insane numbers. Slow boy, you nailed it, man. Let me pull your comment up here real quick. Yeah, the media definitely doesn't define it that way. Nah, they kind of do what they want to do a bit to some degree. But man, it's just so crazy. It's just so crazy where we are as a nation. And as the chief I think it's in Philly said, sheriff or the chief of police said, just it breaks your heart wondering where the outrage is overall nationwide. Where is the overall outrage? Where are the protests on behalf of law enforcement? You probably won't see it because the left, the anti-police mob, has done such a tremendous job of villainizing the police. So the odds of you seeing anyone protesting are slim and none. You won't see, I highly doubt you'll see any major public figures or very few public figures speak out loudly and try to organize something on behalf of law enforcement. Now, it does happen on occasion, but I definitely think it's rare. But now I want to show you some additional footage, y'all. I want to share with you some body cam footage from some of the recent incidents that we've seen. So let me see here. I'll show you this one here. This is here in town. I really wanted to reference the events of Officer Ty here in Las Vegas, events of his murder. The body cam footage has been released, so we have a lot more detail nowadays as to what went down. And it's horrific. It's just truly horrific and truly sad. I didn't know him as far as like we were boys or anything like that, but I know we crossed each other's paths a few times. And everything I saw from the guy, he was just an awesome dude. And everything I've heard about him, people that really knew him just said how amazing he was. My prayers are definitely with the family. And just a word of encouragement to my brothers and sisters out there in law enforcement. I would argue that the vast majority of people in this country appreciate you and respect you and thank you for the job that you do and understand how difficult it is. And the reality is in law enforcement, we're human. We're going to screw up. We're going to make mistakes. Some officers are going to act in ways that are horrific, and not to justify any of that, but when it's all said and done, we're human. Officers are human. They're going to mess up. And I just hope and pray as time goes on that they'll be given the amount of grace that is given to other fields to make mistakes and to attempt to grow and improve. But let's watch some of this footage here. It is graphic, y'all. I mean, it doesn't show any details, but you know what's going. Ultimately, knowing the outcome, you know what's happening.
What's going on, man? Go ahead and put your hands on the steering wheel. Yeah, what's up?
Let me just add this here real quick. You heard it. I'm sure most citizens have heard it so many times that you probably don't even think twice about it. But as an officer, and people wonder why officers are such sticklers for control. And I've referenced this, I've mentioned this multiple times. You're walking up on a car early in the morning, late at night, and you have no idea of who you're dealing with. You don't know if that person has a weapon, and the last thing that they want to do is go back to jail as a former convict, and the last thing that they want to do is to go back to jail. You don't know if they have dope in their car. You don't know if you're dealing with the serial killer or the soccer mom. You have no clue. But in the short period of time that you arrive, you have to make a series of assessments to determine, is this individual a potential threat or no or not? And you will always be reacting to the suspect's actions or the individual's actions. So you're always behind. Officer Ty's walking up to this vehicle, and sadly, this ends up being the last vehicle stop he ever makes. I just want y'all to think about that. I want every officer out there who's hearing this, who's watching this, to think about the idea that your next stop could potentially be your last. And it all depends, or largely depends, on the mindset of the driver, of the suspect. So if you find yourself getting complacent with the suspect's hands, and I'm not saying that Ty was, but if you find yourself getting complacent with an individual because you've done so many, man, you just never know. You never know what you're going to be dealing with, what's going to be coming up. So just a reminder, stay sharp. Officer Ty was on it here. He reacted. He tried to minimize, he tried to stop the threat, but there's not a whole lot you can do. And I'll let the video proceed so you can see exactly how things went down.
What's going on, sir? Hey, get out of the car! Get out of the car! You can stand right there. Just hang out right there for a second. Hey, get out of the car! Get out of the car! Control 1R4. Shot fired, shot fired.
Northeastern.
Alright, he's 20.
Obviously, this is taken from the air unit, and this is the suspect takedown.
425, Desert Inn, slow rolling, not stopping for units. Any other units, just come on this channel. We're going to do it all on this channel for now.
Just to put you in the mindset of the officer, right now you are attempting a vehicle stop on a suspect who just fired at another officer, who just fired a shot that ultimately killed another police officer. And you are on the scene attempting to make a vehicle stop, takedown, attempting to take him down. Can you imagine the adrenaline, the fear even, the nerves that's going on in these officers, in their bodies? Training, y'all, training. It matters.
Crossfire. Units, he is under 40 miles an hour. He's in the CVS parking lot here, DI and Eastern, southeast corner. Let's get him stopped.
CVS parking lot at DI.
Pit maneuver.
Air 5, we do have a successful pit. Units, watch your crossfire. Watch your crossfire. Let's get him blocked in. All right, he's going to be in the eastbound lanes. Units are blocking him in now. Crossfire is going to be towards the northeast. We got units towards the southwest of it.
Now, I'm not sure what, I know he was hit with a large caliber rifle round. And I think this might have been the gun that was used. I heard it was a handgun that shot a 7.62, I believe it was, round. And this is kind of like that AK style, Kalashnikov. Yeah, because that's small caliber. Whew. Man, oh man. Like, what do you say to that? I mean, honestly, like, what do you say to that? It just shows the dangers that officers are faced with potentially that come with the job. And there's so many people who love to say that law enforcement isn't dangerous. And I'll be making a video that deals with this data specifically, and hopefully it'll be out this week. But typically when they make reference to that, they'll use some statistics from labor, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, places like that. And they'll say, well, they only have so many accidents. But if you're looking at it from accidents, yeah, it's not that dangerous. But if you look at it from a perspective of how many injuries occur, violent injuries, violent attacks, or even homicides occur, there's no question that policing is one of the most dangerous jobs in the nation. There's just no debating that. Well, some may debate it because there's some people out there that will want to debate everything. But the reality is policing is an extremely dangerous job. And sadly, again, they have been villainized to be some of the worst people, made out to be some of the worst people in our country right now. All right, let's show some. I want to show at least one more video here. One more video. I think this one's good here. It'll go over just some of the, just showing a little respect and honor to some of the officers over the last couple of weeks.
Here we are, abandoned hearts, on bended knees with outstretched arms. God, hear us from heaven, send us your presence. We need you, Lord. We need you, Lord. We need you, Lord. Summer and spring may pass, but winter and fall won't last. I can trust the Creator, who's perfect in nature.
190 who've lost their lives this year. Yeah, that's for those who think that policing is not dangerous. But what are your thoughts on? I mean, overall, what do you think? Do you think policing is dangerous? Do you think being a cop is dangerous or not? If you don't think so, I'd love to know your comments. So make sure you comment down below. Let me share with you some additional information here. Share some additional information. Let me make a comparison. Because a lot of times, and I'm not really trying to, I'm just going to go with it. Because the thing that we hear in our society over and over again is the killing of unarmed black men. We hear about that ad nauseum. And I'm not attempting to minimize any of that. I think anytime an innocent person, quote unquote, innocent person is harmed or injured, that's a problem. And that's a problem that needs to be addressed. But let me just share with you some data from probably the best source we have nowadays, the Washington Post. I know it's shocking to say the Washington Post use of police shootings database. Let me just share with you some of their information. There have been, this year alone, there have been 53 officers who were shot and killed, as we mentioned earlier, from gunfire. This is from the Officer Down Memorial page. 53 officers who were shot and killed by gunfire in 2022. If you take the last 4 years, let's go back to the last 4 years. We'll throw in 2022. as far as unarmed shootings of black males by the police. So far, it's been 6 this year. 6 this year. 2021, it was 8. 2022, it was, 2021, it was 8. 2020, it was 18. 2019, there were 12. If you go back, let's even say if you go back to, let's go from 2019. 2019 and 2020, there were 30, combine those two. At 2021, 38. In 2022 so far, that's 44. So in a 4-year period, you have less unarmed black men shot and killed by the police than the amount of officers that have been shot and killed this year alone. This year alone. But you have some out there who are constantly claiming that the police are hunting down black men, killing us, and that it's an epidemic. It's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. These are individuals, and I always make sure I make this point. I always try to make this point. Unarmed does not automatically mean that you are not a potential threat, that you are not potentially dangerous. Because every year, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 people are murdered with no weapon at all. No weapon involved at all. But let's just leave it as is. It just demonstrates that we have, as a nation, as a society, have totally lost our way, and we are totally confused. We are focusing in on areas that, in the grand scheme, I'm speaking, in the grand scheme of things, are not that serious a problem in comparison to other areas that should be getting more of our attention. A police officer who's lawfully fulfilling his or her duties and gets gunned down, and we see the numbers spiking, that's a problem. But again, you won't hear a whole heck of a lot about it. There'll be news reports, people will talk about it, but you won't hear a whole heck of a lot about it. Primarily because many of these media outlets and these individuals in the entertainment industry and these politicians are capitalizing on it, because they use this as a means by which they can keep certain minority groups angry, Black and Hispanic primarily, and it keeps them in power. Everything is about race. Everything is about bigotry, so-called racism. So they have to use it. And if they continue on, there may not be a society for them to even govern over, but I'm sure for a lot of these people, it's all about power. A lot of these people, it's all about power. Just look at these numbers. And on an aside note, again, when we're talking about the issue of police killings, since 2015, you have seen historically, with the exception of 2020, and considering how crazy 2020 was, we understand why the numbers might have spiked. But the number has consistently, overall, as a whole, gone down. Gone down. The numbers have consistently gone down. But once again, a lot of people don't really care about those numbers. They want to make their point. They want to push a specific agenda. But anyway, y'all, I appreciate y'all for joining me and joining in on this conversation. We as a nation have a long way to go. And I pray that as time goes on, we can find our way again, so to speak. That people will understand the role that law enforcement plays, that they absolutely play a vital role. Because you already have people who hate and fear the police, and then you also, which is keeping the numbers down when it comes to recruiting, and they've been villainized for the last 10 years or so. And then if you couple that with the spike in violent attacks, it shouldn't be a surprise why so many people why they're having such a difficult time in recruitment. The numbers will never get to where they need to be, not at the rate we're going. But once again, I'd love to know your thoughts down below. I appreciate y'all for joining me. But as always, stay safe, God bless, and make sure you join the conversation.